Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
Make sure not to miss a single episode and subscribe to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the U.S. Army War College, U.S. Army, or Department of Defense.
Welcome to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tom Spahr, the Desario Chair of Theater and Strategic Intelligence here at the Army War College. June 25th will mark the 75th anniversary of the North Korean invasion of the South and the initiation of the Korean War. The intensity of this crisis has ebbed and flowed over the last 3/4 of a century, ramping up in the last few months. North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran are cooperating now perhaps more than ever in the wake of the war in Ukraine and Iran's support of attacks on Israel. North Korea is supporting Russia in the form of ammunition and soldiers, and in return, the Russians are funding the North Koreans, which has emboldened them, and North Korea now has increased activities across all domains of land, sea, air, space, and cyber. It is a dangerous time on the Korean Peninsula. Today in the War Room studio, we are fortunate to have perhaps the best person in the world to talk about North Korea, the current commander of U.S. Forces Korea, General Xavier Brunson. General Brunson leads the U.S. Forces, the United Nations Command, and the Combined Forces Command of the U.S. and South Koreans in the so-called Tri-Command. He's here at Carlisle Barracks addressing the Army War College students and our guests attending the 2025 Strategic Landpower Symposium. Before assuming command in December of 2024, General Brunson led at every subordinate level, including recently completing command of the U.S. Army's 1st Corps at Fort Lewis-McChord. Before that, at the 7th Infantry Division, and at the brigade level, he led the 525 Battlefield Surveillance Brigade at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He is also a proud graduate of the U.S. Army War College. General Brunson, welcome to Carlisle Barracks, and thank you for joining us today in the War Room studio.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tom, and I appreciate that great introduction.
All right, so let's start with a little bit of history. You know, as the United Nations Command celebrates its 75th anniversary on the Korean Peninsula, could you please share your perspective on the history of this conflict and how the UN Command has evolved over the decades and how that might help us better understand and predict the future?
Tom, one of the things that I really have been thinking about and talking to people about recently is accessing the emotion that led to people coming to the aid of the Koreans in a tough time. How do we get back that same emotion that caused them to give then that will bring them back now? It's a recognition on my part that for emotion, people will do a great many things. For emotion, people lay down their lives. We've got this room that I show all the ambassadors from the member states. It's called the Armistice Room. We've got one of the tables that was in the room. I don't know if it's the one that had the actual armistice on it, but it was in the room. We have old photos of the room where the armistice was signed, and this is one of those tables. We've got the flags of the nations in this room. We have the books of the war dead in the room. And when I show that to ambassadors, I always ask each one, are you ready to do this again? And when I leave it with them, I just say, you brought hospitals before. Are you prepared to bring hospitals now? Because I've got to try to drive. I've got to try to drive and get sort of in our institutional memory the need to stay tied to these nations.
Yeah, so you kind of went in this direction because the next thing I was going to ask you about is senior leadership. You know, that's what we teach here at the Army War College. And we spent a lot of time talking about strategic leadership down to military leadership. You've commanded at every level, right? The brigade, the division, the corps. How is this command different? And how have you had to adapt your leadership to the 4-star level, the combined, the United Nations Command? There's a lot going on there, so it's a complex environment. So could you talk to me about the strategic leadership?
I tell you, Tom, I don't have an outside voice anymore. All my voice is inner monologue and then trying to be deliberate in my communications. I find that at this level, you have to be absolutely intentional. You have to be deliberate. and you have to stay on message. But what really helps that is if you give people who work for you insight on the way that you're making decisions and what's important to you. One of the things I talked to the folks in the auditorium about today was giving yourself over to thought in the active pursuit of time to think. And what I found is that over time, there's some pretty good stuff rattling around in my head. It's the application that changes at this level. It's this understanding that you truly, the first time in my career that I absolutely, across 3 commands, need people to be able to do their job. But they can only do that if I give them quality guidance, if I give them absolutely clear intent, and then I show myself able to help them to make decisions and solve problems.
Yeah, that's great. I want to talk about readiness and modernization right now. The challenge in Korea, it's different than anywhere here stateside. You have to always maintain that fight tonight mentality towards readiness, yet at the same time you have to modernize, because the North Koreans and the Chinese, they're advancing in their nuclear, their missile technology all the time. So how do you balance that? How do you maintain the necessary readiness level while at the same time modernizing for future war?
Yeah, so, I'm taking a great note from the great aviators I've worked with in the past. We are able to, and if you want to just make it a more wide application, I guess you could talk about the airline industry. Every plane that the airlines have is not flying all the time. They take time to upgrade their fleet while continuing to do the mission. And I'm trying to get us in the same mindset, but it's not just us in that mindset. It's got to be 19 other nations. So the 18 nations of UN Command, as well as our partners in the ROC. And then if you want to make it even 20, it's with the Japanese. We have to remain interoperable. And the easiest way, the simplest way that you can never make an excuse for any of that is human and procedural interoperability. If we can fight with what we have in an integrated fashion, we're better off than we are with the highest tech goods in not being able to synchronize those things together, not being able to work in the same space and communicate. So what I'm trying to do is look at the best in breed in terms of technology, but think, again, deeply about how do we integrate that into the theater while maintaining our eyes on the job that's there before us right now, today.
Yes, sir. We talk about interoperability all the time here, and you went right there. We talk in terms of technology, doctrine, and human. You were really emphasizing the human, which I agree makes sense in that environment where you have so many partners and allies to try to synchronize. So you have been known, you talked about it today, as an innovative leader, and innovation is critical throughout our formation. Warfare is changing. We have 2 new domains, space and cyber, and we believe, and we've heard our leaders repeatedly say that the one who masters artificial intelligence first will have a distinct advantage in warfare. How do you inspire innovation in this complex environment, and what are some of the technologies that you prioritize within your command?
Yeah, so one of the things that we want to try to have is all domain awareness. Anything that helps us to have all domain awareness that's the first thing we want to proceed after. We want to pursue that with all violence, vigor, vim, whatever words you want to use. We want to pursue that. And so some of that is recognizing that it might not be here yet. But as we talk with industry, if we talk with thought leaders about what's possible, what's in the art of the possible, that mindset's got to permeate the entire formation. And when it gets to that point, you start to talk about people, what would you do if you had a thing that could do X, Y, and Z, as opposed to 3 separate things that only do X, a thing that does Y, and a thing that does Z. And what you find is they start to look at products. I've been absolutely astounded by the innovation that's bubbling up in the formation. As we get people from Space Force K that are coming and working, and they're showing us, opening our aperture up to all these different things. Space-based ISR. That sounds like something off of Star Trek to me when I say it out loud. But we're doing these things right now, and it is absolutely incredible. I also think that one of the things we have to do is see what other people are doing and how we might fit it to us. So I spend a lot of time looking at things that Admiral Paparo is doing in Indo-PACOM, because he's got this huge swath of an operating environment that he's got to deal with. As far south as Australia, as far west as India, and as far north as me and Japan. And he's got to manage all that. But I believe in a smaller sense, if I can get all domain visibility, if I can have a common operational picture, a common intelligence picture, and a common logistics picture, that takes care of those three kings that I'm always talking about, which is posture, protection, and sustainment. So we want tools that allow us to see first, understand first, and then act decisively. And that's the charge to the team. And when you release people with that, you are just constantly surprised by their initiative to find things that help you to see, sense, understand, and act faster than the adversary can.
That's good. I want to come back to that technology a little bit, but first you mentioned something there, your relationship with Admiral Paparo and Indo-PACOM. Our strategic direction has us firmly focused on the Indo-Pacific and China specifically. So can you describe that relationship with Indo-PACOM and how the situation in the Korean Peninsula fits into a potential future war with China?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is I've known Admiral Paparo since we were both 1-stars. And so there is a certain thing, Tom, and you know this, there are people who we rotated back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan with from other services that we came to know early that we were like, man, if I ever get a chance to work with that cat again, I want to get after that. And so there's that personal touch, that friendship that we have. But it's also my understanding that as a subunified commander, I'm on par with his components there. And I've got unique responsibilities inherent to the peninsula that I need to get done for my boss. But I also know that if I can't talk to him, if I can't communicate with him, if I can't use the same systems that he's on, then I can't do that for him. I believe in my heart of hearts, my job is to keep things quiet in Northeast Asia, so that he can focus on any strategic direction that we're given from the department. And if I can manage to do that, I know that if he's on Maven, I need to be on Maven. If he's got a certain communication suite, I need to be on that. If he develops a mission partner environment, I need to be a part of that environment. If he's using a certain ammunition, I have to see, can I apply that in my area? And it's almost like, I want to be the guy that's going to Sam's Club with him, not just going to Walmart.
Right. So whenever we talk about this war, we war game it here, we tabletop it, we just talk about it in the classroom. The A2AD bubble consistently comes up. And the challenge of penetrating that is just in the forefront of our minds. China's really invested in their air, sea, space, and countering our advantages, right, in the air and in the space specifically. How does your command's position there on the Korean Peninsula enable that in a contest with China?
Yeah. So I would tell you that when you start to, I put up a map in there, and the map has Japan in the sort of map ordinally, has it in the north. And that's the perspective looking out from Beijing. One of the first things they see looking from Beijing is Korea. I'm inside the A2AD bubble. I am on the Asian continent. I'm there. And if I'm there, I have the potential to impose cost on all three of the Asian sort of focused or centered adversaries. So when I look at those authoritarian regimes of China, of DPRK, and Russia, in the Sea of Japan or the East Sea, we can counter Russia right there. We can make that a lake. In South Korea, in the West Sea, we can counter the Northern Theater Army, for example. I mean, there are things that we can do from our positional advantage that can't be done anywhere else.
Yeah, sir. When you showed that map during the session today, it really opened my eyes, changed my perspective on it. you are closer actually to Beijing than you are to Taipei in Taiwan, which is something I never realized until you turn the map upside down and you look how central, and you put Korea in the middle of it, how central it really is to that. To that
it's a selfish
conflict.
perspective.
It is, but it's insightful. You are inside that A2AD bubble and can have an impact there. Sir, you mentioned AI in C2 and targeting. Yeah. You mentioned Maven. We've run a series of podcasts here with 18th Airborne Corps, 1st Corps, and they're talking about how that. So I'm interested in your experience with Maven and AI for targeting and then for command and control as well, because it does both.
Yeah. I think one of the first things we have to figure out, though, is the bandwidth of these things. And so if I could kind of walk the dog on this the way I'm looking at it right now, how much bandwidth is it going to take? How many points of presence do we actually need? And what is it we want from the tool? Because it's really easy to say, big hand on a big map, we need Maven. But it's harder to think of how you would apply that. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like when I look at artificial intelligence, it's got to speed me to a decision with a human in the loop. Right. The work, the scratch paper, that's what I want AI to give me. Mm-hmm. I don't want it to actually solve the problem for me, but I do want it to do all the work leading up to the answer. So what I think it can help us do is to take a large pile of data and to compile it into something that's going to be digestible. It can get it down to what we actually need from that. Along with that is our ability to tie into the right large language models and to understand how to ask of that AI system the right kind of questions the right way. And if we don't get the answer we're looking for, we don't skew it. We say, this is just another data point for us to use as we move to decisions. And that's why the training of this is going to be so important. It's one thing to get a tool, but to not understand it is almost criminal. And that is the one thing that I want our team to be able to define is, what is the workload we're seeking to get out of this product? What kind of workflow are we going to develop? And where are we going to insert this tool in so that we can then get back to, we've seen something, we understand that thing, now we can act decisively. That's what it's got to be able to do for us.
Yes, sir. We say that all the time. New technology is only as good as it's incorporated across the .mil-PF, the doctrine, the organization, the training, the personnel.
Absolutely. So, and if you ask the wrong questions of AI, you're going to get an answer, but it might not be what you want.
No, I like that word, digestible, helping us get to something we can manage in this environment where there's so much data. How do we wrap our arms around that? And AI should be enabling us for that. And I think that system is working towards that. All right, switching topics just a little bit, sir. You really talked a lot about land power, and there's a Strategic Landpower Symposium, so it was appropriate. But it was insightful as well. And I wanted to if I could just ask you to talk a little bit about the importance of land power, right, on the Korean Peninsula and then writ large in warfare.
Yeah. Tom, I think that I used to explain to people, Kevin Costner got an Oscar for Dances with Wolves, which happened on the land. He was universally panned Rotten Tomatoes 0 for Waterworld. And I think that sometimes we forget that every conflict we've ever been in has had components across domains. We've been multi-domain forever. We recognize that there was a war to be fought in Midway, but there was also the March on Berlin. We recognize the fact that there were some activities that occurred even in Panama in the water, but there were also paratroopers who jumped and got on the ground. In order to secure people centers and to rapidly conclude conflicts, it requires the land domain. It always has, it always will. As long as people live on the land, then they'll have to be dealt with. And land forces are those who do that. I think that sometimes we believe that we can have some shock and awe kind of campaign that resolves a conflict immediately. Mm-hmm. Those things are components of, but eventually someone's going to have to take articles of surrender, or someone's going to have to move from the X to the objective. Somebody's going to have to do that, and only people can do that. We're going to have to close with and destroy things. We're going to have to use diplomatic. We're going to have to use information. We're going to have to use the military. We're going to have to use economics. We're going to have to use finance. We're going to have to use intelligence and law enforcement. All those things are going to take place on the land. The land power network that exists in the region is strong. When you look at the CHODs across the Indo-Pacific, the large majority of CHODs, chiefs of defense, are Army people. That network that exists extends to their forces. I believe, last I checked, 4 of the 10 largest armies in the world, maybe 5, are in the Indo-Pacific, in the world. They're in the Indo-Pacific. They've all got land forces. The North Koreans have a ground force of 1 million people. They're going to have to be dealt with. And so I think that the increasing importance of the land domain is a thing that we sometimes sort of wish away. But the fact remains, someone's going to have to close with and destroy an enemy. That last 100 meters will always be fought from now till time is up.
We'll be right back. Do you know a sharp officer, senior NCO, or warrant officer who's ready to lead beyond the wire? The Harding Fellowship prepares Army leaders to drive professional discussion by earning a graduate degree and editing their branch journal. Applications open this summer. Learn more at www.lineofdeparture.army.mil/Harding. Links are in the show notes. Back to the show.
Yes, sir. So you keep coming back to allies and partners. So important. Germany rejoined the United Nations Command nearly a year ago. What motivates a country like Germany to continue supporting the United Nations Command 75 years later? And what else should we think about when we're talking about our allies in this conflict with China?
I think that nations have decisions to make. And when they see a mission like the UN Command and the maintenance of the armistice, it's a host of nations who came together and said, we agree this stops now. We want to stop hostilities. If we can't get to a peace treaty, we'll have an armistice. And then over time, when something has worked well, it becomes the old adage of every beautiful baby has 100 fathers. And people remember the commitments that they made in the past. And that's why I talked earlier about the fact that we have to access that emotion which leads nations to come back and to find new ways to contribute to peace. And that's what I think we see on the Korean Peninsula. Yes, you have North Korea. Yes, there's a demilitarized zone between the nations. Yes, there's a joint security area. But what they see is that has worked. There's not been a shooting war. Now, there are things below the threshold of armed conflict that continue to happen politically, in the cyber domain, even in the electromagnetic spectrum with jamming and things that are going on. But we're not shooting. And they want to be a part of that. And they've got something in their institutional memory that says, you know what? We did that. We were part of that. Let's get back.
So I used to work for General J.C. Campbell, John Campbell, and he was the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. And he used to say all the time, 4 stars manage risk. So every time I have the opportunity to talk to a 4-star, I always ask them, how do you think about risk? And how do you manage risk, and specific perhaps to the Korean Peninsula?
Yeah. And so one of the things that I am never out of contact. Never. You won't ever see in my email box a out-of-office assistant or anything like that. I'm always in contact. And when I look at risk, I look at risk from the perspective of I can't let anyone assume risk for me. And so when I look at the rocks, one of the things I continue to talk to those within the Republic of Korea in the military about is, let's not do anything that puts my force or my mission at risk. I will do the same thing for you. I'm not going to do anything that puts the nation of Korea at risk by virtue of actions that I've taken. And I also look at what risk are my bosses managing? And where's that sort of this Venn diagram of risk? And when I draw that out on a piece of paper, what I see is oh, we all share this same risk. This one action could cause all of us to fail or put forces at risk. And I also want to make sure that people only assume risk who work for me requisite to their level. And I think that's a conversation that has to happen frequently. You know who doesn't have a problem assessing risk? Aviators. Because nobody wants the thing that they're flying to fall out of the air. And we have to do the same thing across domains. What risks are inherent to what I'm doing? And when we think about and talk about combined joint all domain operations, there are risks inherent in each of the domains that are tied to that for nations. So when you're working in a coalition and you're working in a bilateral or a trilateral relationship, you have to, as a leader, be able to measure or understand and assess the risk inherent to those other nations, commands, and people that you might not, sort of offhand even think about. You're just kind of focused on yourself. You've got to look wider. Strategic leaders have to look wider at the components of risk, what builds toward risk, and where are you on a scale. If you can't assess where you are on a scale as far as risk go, that's when black swans happen, and you don't have a thing that you can do. Black swans are going to occur, but then you fall back to process and procedure, which help you to mitigate or ameliorate some of those things that could be damaging if you weren't ready for them.
So when I asked you about strategic leadership up front, you said one of the things you like to do, or you ensure you do, is give your subordinates insight to how you're making decisions. As an intel officer, that's music to my ears, because I'm always trying to figure out, how do I get inside the boss's head, the boss's best intel officer? How do I figure out where his mind is? Now, when you were a colonel, sir, and I first met you, you were commanding the 525 Battlefield Surveillance Brigade, now called an Expeditionary Military Intelligence Brigade. That was a time when the Army was experimenting with having combat arms officers commanding these historically MI brigades. So in light of that experience with intelligence, can you talk about your relationship with intelligence and your intel team? How do you approach that intel-consumer relationship?
Yeah, well, one of the things is what you just said, that consumer relationship. I had to stop being a consumer and see myself as someone who is producing. That Battlefield Surveillance Brigade was to fill a gap that was noted in echelons above brigade intelligence. How were we going to do that? That was a response to that. And since that first foray into intel, I had a prior association with intel while working within USASOC, and the importance of intel to get people to the X. And I understood how important that was to helping to develop operations that were of national significance. Now, in my current role, I try to give time to those intel professionals so they can hear the questions I'm asking. I think that's important. I think being able to not necessarily understand the science behind all the three-letter agencies, but to just be able to say generally, we need more from the IC in this regard, and then allowing those professionals to get you to the right place. An example, we were sitting there talking about new GPs that had been opened up in the demilitarized zone on the North Korean side. And we started seeing some construction that was occurring as well. And I said, what would be great is if someone in the IC could show us a picture of what that really looks like. And they solved the problem for us. And then we were able to go back to the partner and say, hey, here's how we're contributing to this relationship. We're sharing with you some things that were developed out of this headquarters, but that we have reach into. And I think a lot of times when we can avail our partners of our understanding of red, of blue, of green, it's very helpful to them. So I find that asking the right questions is always going to be powerful. If you can ask the right question, somebody can get you to the source. It's also understanding that I'm not the intel guy. I'm the guy who has requirements, yes, but those requirements are built on asking the right questions. It's about looking wide, a wide field of view, and then asking the question and allowing those intel professionals to do what they do. And they'll always get you to the right source.
Yeah, that's great, sir. Seeing yourself as a producer, asking the right questions, and the best products are the ones that they give you, and you can share immediately with your partner. Something that we struggle with, but I think we're starting.
Tom,
to get
that
better
is That's the power of coalitions, is getting it to a real level where you're actually working together. That's a great point.
So we're about out of time today, but I want to give you the opportunity for any final thoughts just to leave with our listeners here at the Army War College and beyond, as we have a wide listener audience.
Yeah, I tell you, I have used pretty much all my words today. I'm right on the line of an introvert / extrovert, right? I'm right in the middle there. But what I would say is that we are a powerful force for good in the U.S. military. And the opportunities that we have to work in coalition with others is absolutely powerful. And all it takes to see that is to watch DPRK, Russia, and China and see what they're doing. The special measures that they go through to bring one another together, to evade sanctions, all those things. We did that first. The free world, if you will, did it first. And now our adversaries are taking note of that. And so what we have to do is begin to look wider at things that they're involved in and not necessarily look to counter those things, but to think they're doing what we're already doing. And nothing could be more instructive to us going forward as we look at large-scale combat operations, as we look at our relationship and standing in the world, than to understand that our adversaries are doing things that we've already done. And we have to continue to mature our relationships in such a way that we maintain our competitive advantage, which is our network of friends, partners, and allies. Maintaining that is critically important in the future.
Sir, thank you. This has been a great conversation, super valuable for our War College students as they get ready to go back out into the force. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So I want to thank General Xavier Brunson for joining us today on A Better Peace, the War Room podcast. And thanks to all of you for listening. And please send us your comments on this program and suggestions for future programs. If you enjoyed this podcast, I encourage you to subscribe to A Better Peace. And please take the time to review and rate this podcast, as it helps us get the word out to other interested listeners. From the War Room, I am Tom Spahr.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu, and have a great day.